Ever since the referendum on the 23rd of June 2016 produced a clear majority from the British electorate for leaving the European Union, hardcore Remainers have been seeking to overturn the result and thereby keep Britain in the EU. It is that aim, not clarity over any proposed exit deal, that motivates calls for a second vote before the first has been implemented. They have used a number of tactics to achieve their goal. They have used a continuation of Project Fear. This despite the failure of such tactics during the referendum campaign and the subsequent exposure of their pre-referendum claims as false. They have attempted to convince the public that the undoubted incompetence of Theresa May and her supporters in the cabinet during negotiations with Brussels is enough in itself to abandon the very idea of leaving the EU. But should we be surprised that a Remainer such as May would be clueless and uninspired in pursuing a policy in which she did not really believe? The most common demand amongst supporters of Brexit has been not to trash Brexit, but to replace May with a competent leader who will pursue a Brexit at all. Most worryingly, the Remoaners have sought to undermine the very legitimacy of the referendum itself. A number of spurious claims have been made in pursuit of this tactic. The voters simply didn't understand what they were voting for. Or rather, only Leave voters didn't really understand. So the referendum doesn't really count. And this even as Leave voters insist repeatedly that they fully understood the implications of their vote. Leave voters are stupid, uneducated morons who couldn't make an informed choice even if they had the information in front of them. So the referendum doesn't really count. Many Leave voters are too old to vote. So the referendum doesn't really count. This is the eugenics argument and possibly the most thoroughly nasty of all Remoaner claims. Leave voters are too selfish. Uniquely among the human race, they couldn't care less about their children's or grandchildren's futures and didn't give it a moment's thought, so the referendum doesn't really count. Leave voters are too working class. Common as muck, getting above themselves, and should never have really been given the vote. The 1832 Great Reform Act was the thin end of the wedge, don't you know? So the referendum doesn't really count. It was the wrong result. Remoaners didn't agree with the outcome, so it didn't really count. I describe this tactic of trying to attack the legitimacy of the very referendum itself as worrying. I'd go further. It is positively dangerous for everyone, whichever way they voted. The procedure followed in a liberal democracy to decide governments and important questions of fundamental policy is a familiar and almost universally accepted one across the civilized world. A campaign is held for several weeks in which all opinions have a chance to be aired and discussed, often ad nauseum. This follows often months or even years of debate in the public forum as part of the normal democratic life of the country. Then a vote is taken. It is a secret ballot to prevent bullying, intimidation and duress being brought to bear on voters. It follows the rule of universal suffrage. Every adult man and woman is given an equal vote, regardless of race, sex, religious affiliation, wealth and income, level of education or age. And it is a strict part of the contract between governing and governed that the result of the vote will be strictly adhered to by everyone, even when, or especially when, we don't personally agree with it. But it is precisely that contract between governing and governed that would in effect be destroyed by the holding of a second referendum. It's important to understand what the second referendum being demanded by Remoaners is not. It is not a vote on the May government's proposed deal with Brussels, pure and simple. The Remoaners have been quite clear that the ballot would be a three-way choice that included the option to remain in the EU. Lest you forget, that was precisely one of the choices already offered to voters in the 2016 referendum, and it was rejected by the electorate by a clear majority. What a second referendum would be saying, what indeed Remoaners have been suggesting for the past 2.5 years, is that they don't accept the outcome of that referendum. And what many Remoaners have also been suggesting is that they don't accept the principle of an equal vote either. They are of the right opinions, level of intelligence, education, social class and age, and you, the stupid, uneducated, ill-informed Leave voters, are not. So what would it mean for the political life of our nation were a second referendum to be held? Note I don't assume one result or the other. Well, the obvious question would be, why bother voting for anything ever again? If the biggest exercise in democracy ever in British history will not be abided by, as explicitly promised by the government who called the referendum, why should we ever trust the contract between governing and governed again? Once the solemn promise underpinning our whole democratic structure has been cheated on, betrayed and lied about, that essential element of trust will be gone forever. We don't trust our politicians, but we do trust the system of democratic voting. What if trust of the latter was also destroyed? We had believed all these years that change was possible through peaceful democratic means. But what if that option is taken away? What if that contract between governing and governed is broken, even just once? What if we could never again trust the governing class to keep their promises, not about particular policy commitments, but about the very process whereby we decide the fundamental operating rules of who governs us and how we are governed? At that point, all bets are off. Trust, the glue of any social and political structure, would be gone. Trust, it's worth remembering, is not a relative value, but an absolute one. We either live by the rules, or we don't even bother taking part. Why would we? To be made fools of? So if, and it's a big if, there were a second referendum, there are to me two obvious consequences for our national political life. The first and most immediate will be a widespread disengagement from politics by millions of people who voted Leave, and perhaps others who voted Remain but who believe in honouring the democratic result, even though they don't agree with it. In future general elections, millions who would have normally voted will stay at home. Low electoral turnout undermines the legitimacy of the resulting government. It is obvious that they do not speak for the people, because very many people did not participate in the electoral process. It also makes it harder, much harder, for the political class to even know what millions of citizens are thinking about any given topic, because they have withdrawn from any political activity at all. That would mark an acceleration of a process of alienation of governed from the political class that has been unfolding in recent years. It was a major factor leading to the vote for Brexit in the first place. Does anyone believe that exacerbating that alienation by discounting the people's vote that took place in June 2016 will improve matters, or make them far, far worse? The other consequence of holding a second referendum is even more worrying. By saying that you cannot bring about change through peaceful democratic means because voting the wrong way will be overruled, what do you have left? Unpeaceful, undemocratic means? There has already been more than a whiff of undemocratic behaviour from Remoaners over the past 2 years. Many would say downright anti-democratic. And I would say that delegitimising the democratic process by questioning that very process as flawed, and by branding over half of the participants as morally and educationally flawed, is anti-democratic. If peaceful change is blocked, mocked and ridiculed, then violence will likely follow, sooner or later. Maybe not immediately, but it becomes a real possibility in future. And where is the moral argument against it if the peaceful alternative is now so much in doubt? Because Remoaners live in their own little world, rarely coming into contact with Leave voters, it is possible that they do not realise the level of anger that is abroad in Britain at present at the impending betrayal of Brexit. Or maybe they do and have such contempt for their fellow citizens that they dismiss such anger as the reaction of stupid people. The main part of that anger is currently directed at the incompetence and dishonesty of Theresa May's government, but hardcore Remainers who marched for a second referendum are not far behind as targets for anger. At least that is the very strong impression I have formed. And make no mistake, this is a development that will affect all other political issues in the coming years. Once you have established the precedent of overturning one national democratic vote, and the largest one in history as well, why would you not overturn others if you could leverage your political, social and cultural influence to do so, or even with the use of violence? Remoaners should be very frightened of that and should pause to think about the fire they are playing with. 4. Contrary to their sneering claims of short-sightedness towards leavers, it is they who are ignoring the effects of their political actions now on present and future generations.